ultimately the short answer. There are things we could be doing to mitigate it. They require funding, in some cases substantial funding, and cooperation between multiple government units. So the watershed district is ultimately the one that would have the authority to move water. And I know that's something neighbors really want to see, and something I think we should be trying based on the initial evaluation from BAR engineering and their Beltline resiliency study. I think it's worth trying. The factors we have to look at is how much is it going to cost, how effective is it going to be, and how much of a risk does it put downstream neighbors for flooding. So it's not a simple solution, and I have a lot of folks really hoping for that. And the truth is, if there was a simple solution that was cost effective, we would have done it. From the county's perspective, one of the things we're working on is working with Met Council to amend the plan for the regional park at Vadnais Snail Lake because it is a regional park. Met Council is involved, so there was a planning process, and it's always these things. We've got a lot of competing feedback. You know, the initial meeting we had, there was support for some things, and in the second meeting that we had, there was support for wildly different things. So our park staff has been working really hard. They put together an initial plan. There was some feedback from the community, concerns about placement of picnic shelters, trail access. So they are pulling that back, revamping based on that feedback. They've also done some work actually going out to the park, socially distancing, and talking to people in the parks to garner additional feedback. So they are working hard and they're listening. And I had a conversation with them last week. I think it will be helpful to have that big picture conversation. And so that's why we're moving forward with trying to get something set up virtually now that it looks like we're not going to be having any large gatherings anytime soon. And it really hinders the conversation about things like our park changes when people are still, you know, really hoping that there's a quick and easy fix that we've missed somehow. And it really doesn't seem that way based on my conversations, not only with the watershed district, but with the cities, with the county, and our really, really smart park staff at our county and Met Council as well. So that is the update. Met Council is also working on a pipeline. Is like a sanitary sewer line that's in the same area. They're coordinating really well with our Parks Department. They haven't been as vocal with the community or engaging with the community on what they're doing. I did reach out to our Met Council rep today, and because in my conversation with park staff last week, they said they've talked to they're doing a lot of engagement with the staff back and forth, but they aren't really. Met Council's not really sharing with the community, so that makes it hard for us to share about what the collaboration is. So we are pushing for some more public information. I will be sending out a newsletter today. I've been doing newsletters every Tuesday, email newsletters every Tuesday since the COVID emergency powers went into place, and I do include the link to the park update plan, so you can see what Ramsey County Parks is putting forward and what changes they've made based on community feedback. So if you're not on that list and want to get on it, you can certainly email me, or I'm just going to put in here the District 1 page link on Ramsey County. You should see a link on there to sign up for the newsletter, and that'll help you stay posted on what's going on. And then once we get a new meeting date put out, I will, of course, notify folks that we had notified about the first meeting, notify in the newsletter. We'll do social media, and I'll let Jamie and Senator Isaacson and Rep. Moeller know as well to get the info out to folks in the community so we can hopefully have a really good, robust conversation. I was so excited for that meeting because we had such good content from everyone and we had worked so hard on it together. It was such a disappointment to have to cancel it. So I'm really hopeful we can get some more information out to the community sooner. Sorry, Dave, that was a lot of things to say. So sorry to dominate there.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you, Commissioner Fretham, for sharing that update. I know a lot of I'm still hearing from folks in the Grass Lake, Snail Lake area who are being impacted by that. So I do think it's important. And even for those of us who don't actually live in that neighborhood, I know our family had been really big users of that county park as well. So I do think that that's an important update. Another thing that we talked about in a previous town hall that I wanted to update folks about is the fishing opener. So it's the walleye opener is coming up this Saturday, and typically I would be participating in the governor's fishing opener. We were supposed to be in Otter Tail County this year. They've postponed having that sort of event, bringing people together from all over the state, but still encouraging people to get out fishing. And we actually saw some updated numbers today where our fishing license sales at this point in the year are the highest they've ever been for, you know, a couple days before the opener in this basically ever. Or so you know, and it seems to be driven by a lot of, so you don't need to be licensed until you're 16. So if you have kids that are under 16, they can just, as long as they're with you and your license, that's fine. You don't need to buy a license for kids. But once you're 16 and you have a driver's license and stuff, we ask you to be licensed. And apparently that is the biggest growth is in the sales to 16 and 17-year-olds right now. So I'm really you know, any kind of positive thing we can hang on to right now, I think is important. But I think, you know, the idea that more of our young people right now, when they're not able to do the things they might otherwise be doing in a non-pandemic world, are, you know, maybe have some interest in taking up fishing, I think is really, really cool. I think that's a really good thing. One thing I do want to encourage folks, though, is that obviously we're still going to have a fishing opener, and you can fish for other non-walleye species right now. But just reminding folks that because people are sort of excited to get out of the house and have a reason to be near the water and out on the lake, that we still need to be really careful about, you know, not congregating on some of those smaller piers, or you know, just being patient with folks at the boat launch, and you know, making sure we're still keeping our 6-foot distance. I know Michael Osterholm from the U of M, you know, he's a really highly respected disease expert. He had a piece in the Star Tribune a couple days ago, you know, still encouraging folks to get out and go fishing, you know, and you know, but just make sure that we're being careful and keeping our 6-foot distance, and still keeping our sort of bubble of, you know, potentially passing on the disease, you know, still keeping that small, but also pointing out that you know, this pandemic is we are going to live in this, you know, different versions of this pandemic world for a long time, most likely. And so keeping up with some of those activities where we're getting outside, where we're being active, are going to be incredibly important, sort of, so we don't have quarantine fatigue. So I think, there was just an article in the New York Times too about kind of the quarantine fatigue idea. You know, we are 50 days into this, something like that, at this point. And, you know, I know when they look at the numbers with the cell phone data and the traffic numbers, that, you know, the kind of the first month, people were really good and really locked down. And sort of as time goes on, more and more people are sort of like, for whatever reason, are starting to change their habits and maybe make their circle go out a little bit bigger. And as hard as it is to kind of keep the tighter constraints on things, you know, we are hearing that still is important, where we're able to do that. You know, you don't want to be the person who passes something to somebody else in our community. I know I had the opportunity to do a social distanced visit with my grandma this weekend, but it was on the other side of a window, and, you know, we even went further than 6 feet back because it was windy, and we didn't know if that impacted anything. And but I think it is important to sort of check in on folks and still find ways to be connected while we're being safe, I think is really important. So but yeah, so still encourage you to get your fishing license, and, you know, you don't necessarily have to go out Saturday. There'll still be fish there other days and other times this summer. But I think that is a little optimistic, a little happy thing going on there, with more people taking up fishing. So another thing I wanted to bring up was that I do want to make it clear to folks that even after May 18th, when we adjourn from the regular legislative session, I will still be available. I will still be holding town halls. My office will still be open. My staff, Anna, my assistant, will still be working. And, we really still are doing work and available to assist people with things. We're doing a lot of constituent service type work, people who they thought they should be getting their unemployment by now and it's not coming through, or even people confused about where they can access food, or there's so many different programs now, and it's really great that we have all these sort of programs that we're opening up to support small businesses and individuals and people who are out of work, but it is confusing, and we know that. So our office is still here and available to folks. Past May 18th, we're technically a part-time legislature, but I'm working all the time. And then we expect that there will be one, if not multiple, special sessions this year. And so the way that things are set up in our state, that only the governor can call a special session, but only the legislature can stop a special session. So the speaker would have to gavel out, and the Senate Majority Leader would have to gavel out of the special session. And so there's sort of that give and take with anytime we have a special session. Once you kind of open the door to a special session, typically there's some agreements in place. And so in this case, we know for sure that there will be a special session. I believe it's June 12th, because it has to do with when the governor's peacetime emergency deadline is. And I expect that it will be extended. We continue to see the numbers of folks going up with COVID-19. We're definitely not trending downward yet. And so I expect that will likely be extended, but I do think it's good that we're going to be coming back into session. So if there is, kind of anything that the legislature needs to do. So, and I've mentioned this in other calls, but just to remember that, the governor, there are certain things that the governor can do on his own in a peacetime emergency through these executive orders. But one of the things the governor can't do is he cannot allocate funds. So if there are funds that are needed to be shifted from some place where maybe they're not really needed right now, but in the future we need to support, whether it's certain types of businesses, whether it's, agriculture or education or, human services and health needs, the legislature would be the ones that would have to be available to allocate those funds. And so that, I expect, we'll be back in June, and I would not be surprised if we're back in session multiple times this year for that reason. And I think, I think that's a good thing. We have to be as nimble as a body of 201 legislators can be to make sure that we're being responsive to this changing situation that we live in, because it isn't, none of this is really really clear. And I know that living with that uncertainty is hard for my family, and I'm sure it's hard for yours too. Let me see what other questions we got here. Another thing I wanted to make sure folks are aware of is that our office is doing some outreach calls to the community. And so I'm guessing it's not the folks who had access to get on a Zoom call at noon, but sort of targeting some of the neighborhoods in our community and some of the places where, folks might not be as well versed in how to access their state representative to get help with things. And so I think just from a general kind of checking in with folks, because it's, normally this time of year I would be out in the community at events. I would be running into people all over the place and having conversations at like we have the Northeast Youth and Family Services event is happening virtually tomorrow. And, typically we would have events at the schools and in all of our cities and through church and all those places where we would normally be interacting with people. And I would have a better feel for, what's kind of keeping people up at night and what the needs are. And we're not able to do that in the same way. And so we're going to be doing more phone calls out to people to just kind of check in and make sure they're okay and that they know how to reach our office if they need assistance. So I think that's important. And related to that, I think, that's something each of us can do. If there's a neighbor that lives alone, if there are other people, from your church community, from whatever groups or community groups that you're a part of, I do think we're really at that point where it can be really helpful to just check in with folks, even if it's just a quick text message or a phone call, to just say hi. I think that's really important. I know we have a couple elderly neighbors in our neighborhood, that it's occurred to me that I don't know if they're okay, and so I think that's super important right now. Let's see, just looking at the chat to see if there's any other questions. And if anyone else has any questions, now's your chance. If you could do the raise hand function, that's usually the easiest way to tell who to unmute. I'll give you a minute to see if anybody's got anything else to add. Doesn't look like it. Oh, I see Kathy. Kathy's waving her hand. If we could unmute Kathy's iPad. Kathy, I don't know if we can hear you. There we go. Connecting to audio.
Oh, thank you.
There we go. All right, Kathy, go ahead with your question.
Oh, I would just thanking you for passing that bill on voting. Is there any chance that there'll be any work on the extension of the vote by mail this year?
My understanding is that this bill is as far as Senator Kiffmeyer was willing to go on this issue. So I don't expect us at this point to have an additional elections bill that will come forward this session. Kind of disappointing. And, there've been states, both sort of red states and blue states, that do vote by mail, as well as different parts of our state already, and more rural areas where folks do vote by mail. And there are ways to make sure that is secure. But, some other folks had concerns about that. And so, as I said, we really, with the divided legislature, we're really focused on compromise. And I think the important thing with this bill is that, because they've been working together, my understanding is that the Senate will pass it. And I think that's really important, because getting those funds out to make sure that our election, that we're not sort of dealing with, we've usually been a very high voting state and a very good state with, we still use paper ballots, which is really important as an election security issue. And so I think the other things in that bill are incredibly important. So I'm glad that we were able to get those done, even if it doesn't go as far with the vote by mail as some of us would like to see. However, I think we can all be communicating those. We get closer to the election. Communicating with our friends and neighbors about how easy it is to request that ballot. You can still request the ballot to vote by mail with our laws as they stand now. It's just, sort of that extra step. But I think the other thing is that vote by mail is, it can actually be a lot more efficient and cheaper than having that many polling places open. And so I think long-term we'll continue to have this conversation. But I think the things in the bill that passed are really important for making sure we can have a safe election, both in August and November, because we don't know, some of the research is showing that we're likely to have, kind of dips and peaks in as the pandemic progresses. And so, making sure that we're set up to do things as safe as possible, no matter when those peaks in the COVID numbers occur, I think is really important. So I think keeping our election staff and volunteers healthy and safe is really important too. So.
Yes. Okay. Could I ask one quick question otherwise? Where's the rental and mortgage assistance in the House right now? I know it went through several, and we're really happy that you did $100 million, and we wanted to see where it was.
Yep. So I expect that we will be voting on that bill before the end of session. I don't know, whether we're going to have Senate agreement or where it's going to go from there. But the House version of the bill is supported by, just so folks know, there's a bill that's been worked on in the Housing Committee, $100 million towards rental assistance and other things, and it's supported by both rental groups and housing advocates as well as landlords. And so we're hoping that we can get somewhere on that bill. I expect that we'll at least be voting on it on the House side. But again, it's like there are so many moving parts and so many different bills that are still sort of unknowns at this point in session. But I'm a co-author on that bill. I'm very supportive. I think that that's really important right now, and I think really unique that it's one of those times where we have sort of renters and housing advocates and landlords all on the same page. So hopefully we'll be able to move that forward. It looks like Kathy and Larry, did you have a question as well?
Mm-hmm.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. One of Al Franken's things used to be that he wanted people to keep commenting so he could stand in front of a crowd and say how many people had called her. And so just to add to the election pylon, the bottom line is those poll pads, everybody had to touch them. And, right now, Dr. Fauci is saying, don't even touch an elevator button without a Kleenex between you and the elevator button. I'm dying to see how they're going to pull off the poll pads when people really have to touch it. And I made a point at this last election because, we had heard people were so concerned about the privacy part. So after I found their record, I would turn it around so they were the ones touching it. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, I want you to do this so nobody sees it. And I was mostly thinking at that point of privacy, but all the people in that line touched the same spot. And the horror of now that we know what we know. And they kept saying from a technology standpoint that we couldn't wipe the poll pad down because it would change the technology, et cetera. I'm just fascinated to see how they're going to keep it safe for the election judges and for everybody else. So anyway, but thanks for the work you did, and I appreciate you had to compromise, and thanks for getting done what did get done.
Thank you.
I hope it works.
Yeah, no, and thank you for serving as an election judge. It's incredibly important that we have people willing to do that, or elections wouldn't work. And I think, you bring up a really good point in that, nothing with this is as simple as we wish it could be, and even for us. So we figured out voting remotely at the legislature by phone, but technically we are supposed to vote in the seat of government, and the seat of government for Minnesota is the city of St. Paul. And that's how our laws are set up. And so we go into St. Paul and either, sit in a parked car physically in St. Paul, or, a lot of us end up going into our offices and then sort of just keeping the door closed. And then we each sit in our individual office and listen on headphones to what's happening on the House floor. And, and I know even just going into that building, knowing that there's some nonpartisan staff that are still there on a daily basis, security and whatnot. I think, just thinking through, I'm like, you're hitting the elevator buttons with your elbow and, thinking, if I walk this way, I don't have to touch a door. And it just everything right now is, can be really complicated. And I think, especially when we really have to think through with things like our elections, okay, think through in your head, what does that look like? And where are the points that could be risks, and what can we do? And so I think ultimately I'm going to be encouraging a lot of folks to just vote by mail. I think that's the safest option. And the more people that do that, not only are they safe because they voted by mail, but now it's safer because we have fewer people physically coming in to the same space to vote. So I think that's likely what we're going to be looking at. And I am happy we have a very, very smart, very prepared, good Secretary of State in Steve Simon. And so I know they're working hard already and sort of figuring out, and now if this bill passes, they can change some of the polling places, because some of the polling places, for instance, in Minneapolis and some of the high rises, that are indoors in a small, in a building where a lot of people live is probably not the safest way to do things. And it's that balance of making sure that we're not limiting the polling places so much that people don't have access. We still want people to vote however they're able to. And so I think that balancing all those things is going to be really important. And I see one last comment about a public safety bill, and I'm sorry, I don't know what 2711 is off the top of my head, but Vince, I will get back to you on that. I will follow up on you. I know I have your email, so I can get back to you about that directly. I don't see that he's still on here. So I think with that, it's. Oh, Curtis, did you have one update? Okay, we'll hear from Curtis from our Roseville School Board.
Hi there. Okay, I'll make this really brief. Two things. First of all, it is Teacher Appreciation Week. And particularly this time, no more time than, than now, we really start to appreciate what our teachers are doing. So if you get the opportunity, drop them an email, give them a call, do it, drop them on social media, and our teachers are great. And our paraprofessionals and the tons of people that make our schools work. The second thing, and I'm going to throw something into a chat right now. There it goes. Roseville area schools, in addition to all other schools, okay, have been providing food for the students. Okay, as of yesterday, we are now adding supper. So now we provide breakfast, lunch, and supper. So if you know of any student, any child, okay, they can show up to one of our 24 different sites. We do not ask for the parents to pay. We do not ask the students to pay. We want to make sure our kids are being fed. So that's all.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for that update, Curtis. And I know too, so in our Roseville area schools, and this is true of a couple other metro area schools, the percentage of kids who qualify for reduced lunch and some of the ways that we do the funding with our school food program is that, they really don't want that food to go to waste. And so if you do live in the Roseville area and your kids could use that food, I know my family has tried it out last week, and it was so simple, and you don't need to have the kids in the car. You pull up, they ask how many kids do you have, you tell them how many kids. They've got a really great system. It's very simple, very easy. They have a good system to make sure that everybody's being safe and you're not within 6 feet of somebody. And then and another piece to that is the thing I realized that for my kids, the kinds of things they get at their school lunch and their school breakfast are different than the things that my husband and I make for them at home. And they were so excited just to see some of those things that were the same things that they're used to eating at school. Even if it's just like whatever the brand of, muffin is that they get at breakfast occasionally, they were really excited about. And so I think, any of those ways we can sort of keep them connected to what their school life was like, and bring a little bit of joy, I think is really important. So really glad to see that, the rollout of adding another meal a day for some folks, because I know families are really, really struggling right now. So, and I think that's a good thing to wrap up with. Thank you, Curtis. And yes, definitely a big thanks to our teachers. I know that they're working so hard to make this work as well as it can, even with all the struggles of the various platforms and that we have to use to communicate with our teachers right now. So thanks again, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you found this useful, and thank you. I'll probably wait and do another one. It'll be closer to once session is ended, just because I'm going to be super busy in the next 2 weeks getting our work done in St. Paul. So thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.